My name is Madison Strong. I am a student of Dr. Wallens, and I am in her History 105 Contemporary World History class. There are many reasons on why the construction of race formed over the years of 1450 and the 1850s. The main reasons that I have seen are the Europeans were extremely greedy, and they also viewed people of color or people that were not European as very unintelligent, and they viewed them more than just a lower class. They were considered animals oftentimes because they did not live like the Europeans. They did not live in what they considered modern housing. They lived off the land and they worked with what they had because they were in that situation. They also didn't speak necessarily English, and so they thought that because they didn't speak English, that they were not as intelligent. The Columbian Exchange is the biggest impact that caused the construction of race. That was the starting of it. The Columbian Exchange started in 1492, and this was a major factor. 80 million people and natives of the land died during the Columbian Exchange, and 90% of natives died. 90% of Native Americans in all died. A lot of the Native Americans were put into segregated schools and were forced to work for the Europeans and forced to grow crops for the Europeans. And if they were not, the Europeans thought that they needed to make them like Europeans in order for them to be smart. In order for the Europeans to survive, everybody needed to be like them. And it caused a lot of fatality, and a lot of people died. In the 17th century, the was the starting of the European imperialism in South Africa. The Dutch settlement was one of the major factors into the imperialism in South Africa. It caused a war between the African Americans and the Europeans, the whites. It caused many of them to die. Segregation was put into place, and they were forced to work for them, and there was much greed in this act. The Europeans wanted the gold and the diamonds within the land, and so they pushed they forced all of the black men to work, and if they didn't work, they were punished, they were lynched, and then the women and children were put into concentration camps, and they were segregated away from all of the Europeans and white people because they were viewed as animals, and they were viewed as inhumane because they thought that they looked like chimpanzees. And they decided to treat them like animals. They thought they were animals, so they treated them like animals. And it caused much tragedy for the people of color because they were separated from their families, put into camps, and killed. In the video that in one of the videos that the Dr. Wallen has given to us, it was called "The Europeans, Racism, a History, a Savage." This is one of the videos I watched, and it showed it was very devastating, and there was a lot of racism, and it described lynching, and lynching was used as punishment, and it was very violent, and it was only directed towards the people of color. Is when they realized it was used for punishment, and it was very violent. They beat them and then often hung them. They were either beaten and then hung, or they were beaten to death. And this was often used as a form of entertainment to the white people. For entertainment, they would beat someone of color, or they would burn them from their feet up, causing much pain and suffering to the person of color. In the 1830s, there was the in the 1830s, race and segregation was brought in to the blacks, or the people of color, because they were allowed to have they were given their rights, but they were put in segregation. There was and it started in 1845. They weren't slaves, but they were separate. Lynching continued, and it caused a problem because they wanted to be part of everybody else and just like everybody else. The law of Jim Crow was also introduced in the 1830s. And the 1830s were an era of violence and terror against people of color, even though there was the amendments. People could be equal, but kept separate is what they called it. And a great example of this was blackfacing. White people would wear black makeup on their faces and make themselves look like clowns to show that and mock the people of color, saying and make fun of them and do communal acts and do shows. And it was a form of stereotyping people. So they would go and dance and act like monkeys or act like animals or not act like humans, but they would be wearing black makeup. And people obviously knew that they weren't black, and so it was extremely racist. Another thing that occurred during this timeline was redlining. Redlining was color-coded maps, and the danger zones were the red zones, and the red zones were where typically people of color lived. And they were put in this section because they were told, the white people were told, if you lived in this section, your economy will drop. Meaning that because the people of color lived there, then their housing would be damaged, and they don't make enough money to take care of their houses or keep their houses going. So they would lose their house. And therefore, the white people would not live in the red-lined zones of the map. And another thing that we talked about was not in class, but was a reading that we went over, was the French Code Nora. And this was a reading that went over the different laws, and it went over Darwinism. And it was saying, and Darwinism was, there was a law that a black person could not marry a white person. And Darwinism made it where it said that many people, if you married a black person and you were white and you had children, then eventually the white race would disappear. And this brought much fright to people because they wanted to keep the white race going, and it caused people to have to stereotype the black community. It caused many things like segregation and racism and lynching and mass destruction of the black community. So it caused many problems. So racism is something that still continues to this day, and throughout history throughout time, has eventually, hopefully, will disappear, but it will take a lot of work. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.